Well, tonight we are going to begin talking about MVC, and we'll talk early on about the basics of MVC, and then specifically we'll discuss the controller, and then Monday we'll jump into discussing the model and the view. And I know we mentioned that we might cover Link a little bit tonight, but I think what we're going to do is wait until we cover the database stuff, and we'll use it more then, because it'll be more applicable to what we're actually doing. And so I haven't forgotten about it. I'm not ignoring it. We'll just pick it up a little bit later. So were you guys able to look at any of this stuff on the GitHub? Have y'all pulled any of that stuff down? There's like sample projects and things.
Okay, yeah. Like, did you post new ones since last time?
So, just there were some on Wednesday night. That's it.
I haven't looked at that. I didn't get a notification about it. It's probably cool. So it's
Sorry.
no, it's okay. It's like it's his fault for it.
All right. So I know a couple of you said that you had used MVC before, but just some basics about MVC. It is a design pattern for developing web applications, and if you research it, there's like discussion about whether it's an architectural pattern or design pattern, things like that. And I'm not going to get deep into that kind of stuff, but we're going to use it for building web applications. And its goal is to clearly define the responsibilities of each area of your code. So as it says here, it isolates the application logic from your user interface layer. So that enables you to kind of move stuff in and out. Like if you wanted to do test data before you're actually tied in, it allows you to isolate that area of your code so that you can test before you actually begin using your real data and things like that. It kind of reminds me of like interchangeable parts, sort of just the pieces are separated from one another. So, and again, supports the separation of concerns. So you're clearly identifying different areas. One other thing, as for developers that I think makes this important or helpful, I know that a lot of you have mentioned before when you inherit projects from people, having some kind of pattern will help you figure out where code is and where it should be and things like that, as opposed to just jumping in. I mean, MVC projects are pretty easy to kind of figure out where something is happening if you're comfortable doing the project. So as we get into learning this, and I don't know how many of you, I know a couple of you said you had used them before, but I imagine most of you will at some point in your careers use them. So at least if you're inheriting a project that has been done in MVC, this will make you more comfortable going in and seeing what you're looking for and identifying problems. If there is a bug and you're trying to solve it, you know, it'll make it easier for you. So, click happy. All right, so your model in model view control is the lowest level of your pattern, which is responsible for maintaining your data. Like I said, you know, you can put test data in there. It doesn't even have to be the same type of data. You know, you can have XML, or you can just have just regular objects that have been pre-filled in that are just there for test, as opposed to pulling live data from a database or something like that. I use that a lot because all of our projects use databases in the background, and so that's kind of what I'm used to. But I kind of think of your model as relating pretty heavily to exactly what is in your database. You'll have an object, a class that represents some entity from your database, which typically is its own table. I'll say that it's always one for one, but generally it should be, I think so. And the other thing that you do inside your model is set up the validation logic. And I know this is kind of a beast a little bit. in bigger projects, just knowing like what values are valid for a certain field, you know, and a lot of this is just going to be good requirements documents, like when you're talking to customers, knowing this kind of data, but that's where that is going to be stored at. That's where that part of the logic gets taken care of, is over in your model. Then the view is responsible for displaying all or a portion of the data to the user, made up of template files that your application uses to dynamically generate your responses. So typically this is the HTML that it spits back out. That's generally what you're going to see. And again, we're going to go more into the model and view on Monday night when we come back in here, but that's just kind of a general idea of like getting the basics of which your separations of concern, what they're focused on. Now, the controller, which we're going to talk about in more detail tonight, is they handle the incoming browser requests. And when they get that request, then they go retrieve the data that they need, and then send that information back to the correct view, basically. So effectively, it controls your interactions between your model and your view. All right, so I guess controls, that's why they call it controller there. So, but it's just like your little middle piece there. And tonight we're going to just talk about a little bit how it actually goes about getting those requests and what it sees when they come in and things like that. So, all right. Yes, Stephen.
Say you want to like pull data from a database,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, you want to format it in like XML or something.
Mm-hmm.
Would you get the data like in the model and then convert it to XML in the controller?
You can convert it, but then like you would use your view to like if you're spitting it back out for display, or no?
Yeah, sure.
If you're spitting it back out for display, yeah, your controller would take it and convert it over. But you're saying it's in a database to begin with.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, as you're reading it in, then you can convert it over, and then if you want to display it out, then you send it back to a view. Does that?
Your controller controls the content types that you return.
Mhm.
So like in the responses, so like JSON, XML, and stuff, your controller's gonna control that, and it can send it, and she's gonna go into that near the end. So like, but commonly they're like the action results in ASP.NET is what they're called. So, but yeah, your controller controls that, and then your view, like depending on the content type, might have like a little bit more to do to it. Like with XML, you might apply actual style sheets because you can do that with XML. Hard to believe, but you can. You might do that in the view, but commonly for like XML and JSON that are just raw data dumps, your controller would just return it directly without passing it through a view.
Well, do you have any examples of like what specifically you would want to do with the XML you generate?
No, I guess like right now I have like this ramp up project, so I just started a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And like I'm just supposed to get a bunch of data from a database table and just like convert it to JSON.
Okay.
So
Is it supposed to be done in MVC, or is it just?
I think so.
Okay.
It's like an ASP.NET project.
Okay.
but
Yeah.
Not too sure.
I mean, and that is another thing that you want to consider, like when you're doing your project, like if this is the most effective way to present your data and organize it, because depending on how large it is, I mean, you don't necessarily have to apply MVC to every project that you're doing. You know, I mean, obviously we're gonna have most of the bigger projects that we do. We all do MVC now, right? You guys maybe not, but
No,
but
we do it.
yeah, you do. Okay,
We do
excellent.
it. Most of the time it's
That's
you
fine.
have controllers and whatnot anyway.
Right. Yeah.
That's the project that I've worked on.
Excellent. Okay. Well, good. So.
Yeah, so I guess like kind of just to answer the specific question, like so the controller, that would be where you would do your like data transformation. So if your specific goal was to just like turn it into a certain form, regardless of whether it's like JSON or XML, like if you just want to transform it, you do that in controller. What she was talking about is that because of the MVC architecture, you actually can like have it do all that stuff automatically for you, using some of like the what'd you call them again?
Action results.
Action results. You can actually just say, okay, well I have a bunch of these things, turn them into JSON, turn them into XML, so it like makes you really lazy. So you don't actually have to worry about converting it. But if you want to do just raw conversion and do it the hard way, then you would do that on the controller.
Okay.
Alright. Any other questions?
Oh, yeah, really quickly, so now that I recall, it was just like when I made the ASP.NET project,
Mm-hmm.
it was just like a web API, and it had nothing to do with MVC, so does like controller and model, do those concepts still apply to other things?
The concepts would, and I haven't done any web API stuff, so I
Yeah,
don't-
that's why it's like MVC can be best described as like a principle. It can go from any type of project. Like people use it in Java where it's not going to be on a browser at all. The idea is just like the separation of concerns. So like what she was saying earlier about like you're new to the project, you have no idea about like the domain of the project, but you know where the model is and you know where the views and you know where the controller is. That idea extends beyond like web. So it can be a web API, it can be in a web facing project, or it could be in a desktop application. So it's not like limited by that, but I think primarily what we use it for anyway is for like browser facing projects. So
Yeah, so like a web API project may not necessarily have views that are displaying it directly. It may pass it off to something else that's using that web service. But yeah, certainly like the model and the controller portion could all very well apply to just a web API project.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Alright. Any other questions? Alright. Great. Well, let's get into our controller, and maybe some of the stuff that we covered tonight will make it a little more clear. It's kind of a life cycle here. So with your controller, it's going to receive your requests through your request routing that we set up in the global configuration. All right, and sorry, you guys get to look at that picture every time. So if we're looking at a ASP.NET MVC project, we're going to do this in
that's the button.
yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Not that one.
I don't know if I didn't plug it up.
Well, where's your problem?
Well, I plugged it into the dock. I just forgot to plug it into the actual. Cords are hard. I agree. If we could just Bluetooth everything, we start dealing with wires. All right. So let me do this again. So I'm going to create a new project, and I'm just going to show you the file structure real quick so you can reference this, and we'll create a new application, and this is not anything super meaningful. So we're going to tell it, nope, don't want to do that. Let's see. It creates a lot of files when it does this, right? Okay. So we can look in the global ASX file, and this is where we're going to see this stuff. But you can see here, this is where it actually calls, sets up the roots, but they are specified over here in your root config file.
Did you select MVC for that?
I did, yeah. And I'm sorry, I accidentally double clicked it and it popped up that thing really fast and then started creating my project. It took so long, I didn't want to do it another one. So, I wasn't so much. Okay. There you go. Alright. So, your global ASX file, you can see this is where that's calling that to go set up the routes that you specify over in your route config. Now, so this is just telling ASP, I guess, to exactly, it's saying we've got a URL, and they've specified your specific areas of it. And so in that URL, it reads each piece of it individually. And this tells it exactly what method, actually which controller to go to, and then which method it's supposed to read. So, and it'll also, the controller also manages what response gets sent back once they actually send that request. So, when they send in the request, it goes to the model layer, gets it, assuming that it actually needs to get data from your model. And it doesn't have to, but that's typically where most of our stuff does. And then it takes that information and spits it out to the view that is specified at the end of the controller. It tells you where to go. All right. And
Listed screens, I guess.
oh yes, thank you. This is going to be difficult. I should just do it all over here, but I'm. I guess I could. All right. So yeah. So we read it. We get the request. It looks at the actual URL, figures out where it actually needs to go, like what controller we need to go to, what method from that controller. Goes and calls that method, does its magic, it goes to the model, then takes that data, spits it out to the view, and the user is super happy with the results, right? Always. Nothing ever happens to go wrong with this. Alright. So in any case, your base class for your controllers is your controller base class, and that's what actually manages all of your MVC handling. So whenever you create a new controller, when you have a new controller that's created, they by default create a few for you. The home one, if you see, it inherits. I'll make this bigger. Our home controller inherits from controller, and so that way all of your controllers don't have all that junk in there with all the MVC stuff to tell it how to read all the routes and so forth. That's all taken care of in your base class, and the controllers you create, you can focus on actually what you want them to do for your specific project. Okay, is any of that confusing, or does that kind of make sense? Hopefully I didn't stumble over it too much with switching between screens. All right, so let's talk about the request routing. So your user is going to type in a URL into the browser. Our user is going to, that's a real easy thing to do as long as you remember. So they'll type a URL into the browser, and then your application goes and figures out where to find, how to find it. So is it okay if I use like bonds or something? Sure. Is that okay with Derek? That's not a problem, is it?
Yeah.
This is a public site.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's true.
If anybody needs any surety bonds, visit our site, so super easy.
This is one of the sites that Carrie and I, mostly me, Carrie helps a little bit. Alabama.gov.
Hey, you did it all.
She's not hosting it.
That's true. All right. So if you see what we've done, we've entered in the URL, and we haven't given it any of the extra bonus stuff. By default, it's going to go to the home controller and pull up index. That's like something that it does by default. Say again.
What tells it to do that?
The default route does, and you can't see it there, but I have a slide for it over here. So here you get to set up the default route of exactly where it goes. So it says. So it's really hard to point at something without selecting it to try to click. Sorry. Okay. So here I want to highlight it, and I can't because if I click on it, it skips. We tell it our home controller is where you go first, and then give it and it tells it to go to index as your action, and then of course your ID if you give it one. And we haven't given it any of that. But if we go click on apply, so we say we wanted to get a surety bond. You see, here is bond,
So bond is the controller.
and apply is our.
View.
This is
our
actually the
action.
method, but it will
Oh,
generate
yeah.
a view. We call it that. We do call it apply, right? Yeah, it's your, yeah. I was just trying to make sure we named it the same thing.
Yeah,
We-
by
we usually
convention
name
there,
it
I named it the same thing. So yeah, commonly the view is named the same thing as the action, but that's not always the case,
Yeah, you
especially.
can pass in the view name and then.
Exactly, yeah.
Yep, very good. All right. So when we're talking about our different pieces of our URL, this is, and you'll see this on a lot of sites. It's not like the old school stuff where you had to give it a path and then tell it the name of the HTML file that you're pulling and things like that. So I missed that.
That's an important distinction because the URL is not a real thing, it's being processed by the.
Right. It's being, you correct me if I'm wrong about this, but it's being dealt with over on the server side rather than by your browser. I mean, I guess that would happen either way, but in any case, so that's how we're setting up what the browser is reading in and sending the request over to our server, and then it reads it, goes in and tries to parse it, and so it breaks it apart, and it's like, okay, your first section that you're giving me, I expect it to be the controller. The next section is going to be the action that the controller calls. And then if there's a third piece, hopefully it's an ID. And what we do inside of our controller is that we set it up to handle that. And right now, by default, none of our methods actually handle anything because by default, I don't have anything to give it. So we can add some methods in here. I think I did that on the next slide. So when we talk about the different methods that we're looking at here, yeah, okay. Not talk about that yet. I need about 4 different hands to manage all this switching around. All right, so looking at our methods, this just says this would send us to contact index. And so if you look down into your views folder, this will be good practice. So all of our controllers, and this is just by convention that we're putting them in folders named controllers, so it makes it easier to find. So in our controllers folder, we have our home controller. Then the manage and account controllers are there, and those are set up to help you create the logins and all that stuff. And you don't have to have that in your project when you create one. You can create it without that. Anything that you do on our stuff is going to use our own authentication. And but Microsoft does build that in. When you create a new project, you can have it automatically do that stuff, and they'll do it for you. So makes it super easy. Okay, but down here is our models folder, which has a few of those things for the identity, but we haven't added anything to it. And if you look in the views folder, according to the controller, they're grouped. So here are the views for the account controller. Here are the views for the home controller. And since that's the one we're looking at, I'm going to open it up. And if you'll notice, we have a view for each one of those actions, the contact, about, and index. And so that relates directly to the view that gets spit out when you say return view there. Okay, and you can tell it to go somewhere else, but typically if you say return view here, it's going to go, okay, well, I'm in home controller, I need to go look for the index file in the view folder, so it knows to go there and look. All right, so
Yeah, a lot of reliance on naming conventions.
yes, there are, so be cautious and don't type it.
Copy paste instead.
I used to tell my students all the time, you don't have to spell anything right, you just have to spell it consistently. So it can be misspelled, just spell it wrong the same way every time, it's fine. Yeah. So I would get tickled too because it's so many. Because again, these were beginning level programmers, and they'll be like, "Well, I just messed up one letter," and I'm like,
It's important.
It's binary. That's all the computer's seeing. You think that doesn't make a difference? I'm like, so anyway, I just thought it was funny, but
Just one letter.
do it.
Just one letter.
Yeah, I was just one letter off. Like, well, you know, the computer can probably go, yeah, it's close enough. Well, this must have been what you meant. What's scary is I think that eventually they will get to that point where they can actually predict what you're gonna say. All right, but as far as NBC goes, yeah, there's a lot of naming conventions that we're following, and so that's really, really important. So. All right, so if we had if we were accepting parameters, one of the things that you can do is, if you're real careful, learn how to type. We'll say ID. ID is what we used to.
I think it's like a small.
Yeah. Alright. So then we can pass it in an ID and we get too far into this stuff, but if we're looking at this contact, let me see if it's got a message on it. Yeah, it prints out our view bag message. So let's just, oh, could have looked up here. Yep. Sorry, I'll stop around. Alright. So we're going to select contact and wait, home and then contact, sorry. Home / contact. Yep. I love our ambiguous calls. Yeah, that's one of the things about the
If you change, and I don't know that this
you
will
want to
work.
change the attribute.
If you change the name of the parameter, because ID has special meaning behind it, so in,
Inbounds.
yeah.
Yeah, but isn't that
ID is set as an optional parameter, so I don't think it determines between the empty and the.
So just name it something different and it should work. If it doesn't.
It's just my guess. I'm not sure.
well? If I thought I hit stop, but apparently didn't.
And then fix your easy.
I swear I was trying to move that down. It's not responding. Okay. No, do you like that? No. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's so condescending.
It really is. What? I mean, it did, but I tried to refresh this one because it already had the.
does have to do with that though, cause like in the defaults, because you have the ID as like
Yeah.
set to optional, and just, it's like using those as both. But if you were to comment on the first one, it would work.
Yeah.
This is one of the shortcomings of ASP.NET MVC is the ambiguous actions, which are limited by basically by C#, not by the architecture of MVC.
So in case if we use like a long instead of an int, would it work?
I doubt it, because it actually, I think it more so has to do with the actual ID, like, because it's one parameter, and because by default we're saying one parameter is optional, it's just seeing those things as one thing.
Okay.
And then if you did the attribute, like you mentioned before. that
Yeah, if
was-
you made it a post, instead of a get, it would accept it and it wouldn't have a problem.
yeah.
So-
I swear I've done overload a controller by default.
Yeah, you can, you have to specify other ways.
Yeah, yeah, it's because of the naming conventions that makes it so dependent on that it's like trying to figure out exactly what you mean, and so you have to be real specific with it. But in any case, if you add the ID in, it will accept the ID and pass it in, and you can see it'll use it. Just use it in my view bag message. So, but you can, obviously you can pass in. A lot of times we're going to be passing in like IDs to go retrieve actual data to print out. But in this one, I just wanted to demonstrate how it would read that route and take that ID and actually store it in, and it'll know that value is going through. So, all right. So, is the request routing, is that you can set up custom routes if you like, and one of the things that's something that we've done before, and I'm not going to pretend that I know all of these. They're real tricky. Like the order that you put them in is real specific. It's not like you can just add one in and it'll go, oh, okay. It overrides depending on the order. I don't remember the exact order, but it's
It's just whichever one matches first, it just goes.
right. Okay.
As if,
And sometimes still, like, I don't know, we were setting them up, and maybe it's because of what we were doing. Sometimes we wanted the top one to be the first one. So it has to be unique enough that you're not going to override each other, basically. Meaning like, sometimes I want it to go to this one, and sometimes I want it to go that way, and you can't just do it that way. Like, you have to be specific. Like, whatever you set up, that's the order. If it finds that, it's going to go to that particular route as soon as it finds one that it matches. So, in any case. I think we were trying to set up different routes for different controllers, and so I don't know. It was just kind of a pain. Typically, we'll just use the default routes that are set up, but you can do custom ones. Just test it thoroughly if you ever do. So, and test everything else around it.
so wasn't this like if you just have another function and you're not using these three controllers, and you can have that. What do you mean by custom controller, like routes?
A custom route, yeah. You can set it up. You can reorder the. I don't know. What does mic up do? I think I turned it on. That's what I was asking. Oh, it's probably volume.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, like here, normally we say controller action ID, and that's our default, right?
Okay.
So if you had another one in, like, what were we trying to do on that one where we were trying to set up the custom routes? We wanted them to be able to put in, like, instead of their ID, it was like their username or something. I don't know. It was something else. We were trying to get like the route set up so that what they put in, it wasn't the ID that they were looking at. I guess username would be fine. Like, so instead of your ID, you just put in like, I don't know, Facebook/Panda Girl maybe, and in any case, and like, so it would read that and go retrieve the correct information based on something different other than the ID and so forth. So is that?
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Yeah. So you're just controlling what actually has to go in the URL in order to find the correct method to return. Okay. Okay. All right. Now, as we mentioned before, this stuff with the code, you can set different methods for your actions. So the two that we use primarily are the get and post. We've been using that since, I mean, I used those in HTML about 1 million years ago. 97, you know, that's roughly 1 million years ago. And, so you're always setting these up, and I know in teaching HTML, that was one of the things that we discussed, like once you submitted, it controlled what information was actually in your query string, depending on the method that you chose. But in MVC, what we're looking at typically with your get actions, it just means it retrieves your information. It just goes and finds whatever you ask for. I mean, in our case, all we're doing is getting a view from it. But as we're saving data, we're going to typically use the post method. So what we're going to actually do is we'll have some piece of information. Most of our stuff we pass in with the model. You know, we just take the model or model and take it and submit it. And so the post method you can use to either create something new or to save it. The put and the delete are not ones that we typically use, but one thing to note, this is the way that we specify is using these attributes. Hopefully you've seen them before, but this is what we were discussing a second ago, that this would work if we made this a post. I never realized how dependent I was on a mouse until I tried using this. Like, okay, so, and there's tons of these methods. These 4 were just the main 4 that that I guess pretty much I'd heard of or ever used. So get and post is primarily what you're going to see. By default, we use a get, and but you can also do a post. And so if we have this as a post, this should recognize this as a different. We'll